Hello, everyone. Let's talk about hypothyroidism and my particular diagnosis story and my story around having hypothyroidism. I hope by sharing my stories that I'm reaching out to some of you that are currently trying to go through a diagnosis or suspect you have hypothyroidism. So let's get into it. So my particular diagnosis story, I was diagnosed in my early to mid 20s with hypothyroidism. Now, I was sick for a few years before I was diagnosed. And with all autoimmune conditions, a lot of us are sick for many years before we actually get the actual diagnosis. Now, I happened to become so sick at the time that they ran blood work for a thyroid panel. Some of the symptoms that I was facing at the time that stand out to me the most are I was losing hair, it was falling out in pretty large quantities, but it wasn't a hair loss where I would get bald spots. So I was often confused with, is my hair falling out? Is this natural or not? Because yes, it would grow back and I never looked like I had thinning hair, but yet I did have a lot of hair loss all of the time. A few of my other symptoms were I was extremely exhausted all the time. Again, I was worried that I was lazy and that other people had more energy and what was wrong with me. So I would play it off a lot as to, you just need to wake up earlier, you need to try harder. And I was really hard on myself, but honestly, I was exhausted to the point where just waking up and doing my morning routine seemed like a lot. Like typical activities seemed like just too much for me. And I couldn't figure out what was going on, because a lot of times when we have that tiredness feeling, we don't assume something's wrong with ourselves. We assume we're just lazy or we're just not trying hard enough. And so this really helps prolong the years that it takes us to get diagnosed, because we don't see it as something's probably off or wrong in my body. And I was doing that for a long time. So I was extremely exhausted. I also had very dry skin. Now, it wasn't skin like all over that was extremely dry, but it was elbows and feet and just very particular areas that were drier than normal. And no matter how much lotion I would rub on, it didn't work. It didn't help in any way. My skin stayed extremely dry to the point where it just didn't feel or look normal. And I was just putting on lotion after lotion and trying remedy after remedy, thinking your skin's just too dry. So what? I didn't realize that it was due to a thyroid condition at the time. Now, those were most of the main symptoms, but something else that started happening when I became more and more sick. Now, remember, I was sick for a few years before I was actually diagnosed. And one of the things that happened to really ramp up my fears as to what's really going on in your body here is I started getting muscle spasms throughout my whole body. And it wasn't normal muscle spasm. It was like if I put my hand out to shake someone's hand or do something with my hand would cramp up. My jaw would cramp up. My arms, my legs, everything would just keep cramping up. Now, when this first starts happening, you think, oh, I'm low on electrolytes, or oh, I just need more potassium. You know, we go through these things. And I was trying to do electrolytes and I was trying to keep potassium and other things hydrated, but it just didn't seem to work. And the muscle spasms were becoming more and more frequent. And it became so bad at the time that I had to stop driving, because turning my neck to see who was coming in traffic, I would get a muscle spasm in my neck and not be able to turn it back. So it was very dramatic muscle spasms. It wasn't just one here or there. It was many all the time, multiple muscle spasms, to the point where I couldn't live a typical daily life without having muscle spasms. And like I said, I had to stop driving. And that was one of my main concerns when I realized that driving was creating muscle spasms in my neck. I realized this has to be something medical going on and probably not electrolytes. So you really need to get this checked out. So those were my main top symptoms when I went into the doctor. And They checked many different things. They ran blood work. And one of the things they did run blood work on was a thyroid panel. And it did come back that my thyroid was hypo. It wasn't working correctly at all. And in fact, I got on thyroid medication very quickly. Now, what I want to point out in this video, when I was first diagnosed with hypothyroidism, we did not then seek to discover if it was Hashimoto's or not. So a lot of times doctors will run thyroid panels, and then once they know you have hypothyroidism, they kind of stop with the blood work there and you just start taking thyroid medication. But a doctor that is inquisitive will want to know, is this Hashimoto's or not? Now, 90 to 95% of thyroid cases are Hashimoto's. Now, why is this important that we figure this out? So Hashimoto's is an actual autoimmune condition, and it means that our body is actually targeting and fighting the thyroid. And so what happens is with Hashimoto's, we create so much damage to our thyroid that it stops working correctly. So if you have had the thyroid panel, you do want to know if it's Hashimoto's. Do you have an autoimmune condition? This is very helpful. Now, when I was first diagnosed with hypothyroidism, it was years later that anyone decided to check to see if it was Hashimoto's or not. And they do that by checking your antibodies and seeing what you have going on. Are you destroying your own thyroid? Now, it's important for treatment to know this. And the reason the doctors don't sometimes run these tests is because whether it's Hashimoto's or not, their treatment of it is exactly the same. You take thyroid medication, whether it's Hashimoto's or not Hashimoto's, you get the same medication. However, if you know it's an autoimmune condition, you can do things. Knowledge is power, right? So you can do things in your daily life, in your diet to address the autoimmune issue. If you don't know if it's Hashimoto's, I encourage you to find out and ask your doctor to run the antibody test so that you know, is your body destroying your own thyroid? And if so, then that's just knowledge that is more powerful to you. So with my particular story, one of the symptoms I forgot to mention is I also became very puffy and retained a lot of fluid to the point where it just wasn't normal. It was way out of the spectrum of being normal. And I did gain a ton of weight. So often you'll hear people that talk about a huge amount of weight gain, puffiness or water retention, hair loss. Some will talk about joint pain, dry skin, and the list actually goes on. Something else that I just realized was happening is that I had a really weird and harsh reaction to cold temps. So it's like the temperature was just a little bit cooler and my body would think I was freezing. I had a hard time adjusting to colder weather. And in fact, it could only be like 70 degrees outside, which really isn't that cold, but I would be bundled up like I was in a winter wonderland, and I would still struggle to maintain a body temperature. And you would think that I was outside in a blizzard. So that's also something that stood out that was very different for me to let me know my body wasn't functioning correctly. Now, what I want to focus on is when you find out that you have hypothyroidism, your doctor will say, take this medication and you'll feel fine. Everything's going to be great. That's what they told me. And I took the medication and everything wasn't fine. I didn't get my energy back. I didn't lose my weight right away. I didn't feel well. I still felt very sick on the inside. And a lot of times the doctors make it sound like you take this pill for the rest of your life and you'll operate like a normal person, but really that's not true. And that's what I wanted to warn other people about, because when I started taking thyroid medication, I had high hopes that I was going to feel like my regular old self again. And I just never really did. And I kept asking doctors, over and over, what is wrong? I'm taking my thyroid medication. I'm following all of the directions to take the medication correctly, yet I still feel terrible. Now, something that was happening is when you have hypothyroidism, every 6 months or once a year, depending on your levels, they will run a thyroid panel to see how you're operating. Now, if you are anywhere in the normal range, they won't increase or decrease your medication. They'll say you're normal, go home, have a nice day. But often, a lot of us in the normal range, because there is a range, often a lot of us still won't feel well. And you'll need to find a doctor that will change your medication based off of, even though your blood work looks normal, based off of how you're feeling, and they're actually listening to your symptoms. Because I didn't have any of the symptoms clear up, which was an indicator to me that the medicine wasn't working correctly for me, or it wasn't enough. And so I would complain and complain, and they just kept saying your levels are within range. That's all we can do. But sometimes your levels can be within range, but still pretty low. Like you're at the bottom of the range spectrum, and they're like, oh, suck it up, you'll be fine. Or maybe you're at the top of the range and you're still not feeling quite well. So there are little adjustments and tweaks that they can make to the medication so that you can still be within the normal range, but maybe lower or higher depending on your symptoms. A lot of doctors that I have seen in my personal experience, as long as you're somewhere within the range, they really don't care if you still have symptoms or not. And for me, the main goal is to feel better and try to live a better, healthier life. And that just wasn't happening. So what ended up happening to me was I ended up finding a doctor that said, hey, maybe this medication isn't enough for you, and let's try a different brand that not only has T3, but also has T4. So they made sure that I had T3 and T4 in the medication, and it was Armour Thyroid. I actually still take it to this day, and it has T3 and T4. There is a small percentage of us that can't make the conversion from the 3 to the 4 or vice versa. You just can't make that conversion. And so even though I was getting thyroid, I still didn't have enough of the T3 and the T4. So by adjusting the different type of medication that I was taking, so I went from a synthetic thyroid medication to Armour Thyroid, which is a natural pig thyroid, is actually what it is. It's thyroid from pigs. So that's a whole other story for a whole other day, but I did much better on this particular medication. And I suspect the reason I did better is because Armour Thyroid has T3 and T4. Now, something to note that's very interesting is so I've been on thyroid medication for years, many, many years. And through that, I've seen a lot of changes with the doctors, where if I get a new doctor and they ask, what thyroid medication are you on? I say Armour, and they're right away trying to change me to Synthyroid, the synthetic version. They don't like dealing with Armour Thyroid. So I had to deal a lot with that. Now, I felt better on Armour. And at my doctor's request, one of the doctors that I had, I did switch back to the synthetic, because he convinced me that Armour Thyroid was too hard and that it wasn't easy to get my thyroid levels, and that if I just wanted to be well and everything be right, I needed to switch brands to a synthetic called Synthyroid thyroid. And I did make that switch. Now, after I made the switch, within a month, my hair started falling out again, and I started developing more thyroid symptoms again, which is exactly what happened in the beginning when I started taking medication. So I went back to the doctor to tell them I need to be back on Armour. And he's like, no way, I'm not prescribing Armour. I don't prescribe it. And anyway, what's happening? And I said, my hair's falling out. I switched, I did what you asked me to do, and my hair's falling out. I want to keep the hair on my head. And the doctor literally said, that isn't enough of a reason for me to change your prescription. I still don't like Armour, and I don't want you on it. The only way that you're going to get Armour Thyroid is to switch doctors at this point. So I switched doctors. I have no idea why that doctor hated Armour Thyroid so much, but I need a doctor that's able to deal with the medications that I want to use or try, and that they can figure out what it is that I need around that, not around pushing very specific types of brands. So I wanted to make you aware of some of my story, because my story, I suffered for a long time and I didn't feel better. And when the doctor said, take this pill and you'll magically start to feel better, I believed them. I really did. And I had that hope. But month after month, year after year, I realized I'm probably not going to feel like my old self. And before we're diagnosed with hypothyroidism, a lot of us gain a lot of weight. And I was hoping that once you start taking thyroid, the weight would just magically fall off. No, that's not how it happens. You actually have to really work hard to get the weight to come off. So if you're just taking a thyroid medication and you're still not feeling well, you're not losing weight, you're going to want to talk to your doctor about this, but you're also going to want to take a look at your lifestyle, the types of foods that you're eating. Find out if you're autoimmune or not. Is your thyroid condition related to Hashimoto's? You're going to want to know that, because the one thing I wish that I had known 20 some odd years ago was that I had an autoimmune condition, and most autoimmune conditions stem from the gut. But during all of those years, I was taking thyroid medication, doing whatever. I didn't take lifestyle into account until just a few years ago. So when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, there wasn't a lot of science around changing your diet or changing your lifestyle. In fact, the doctors rarely, if ever, talked about it until the last few years. Now, when I see the doctor, they're like, hey, are you eating gluten? Don't eat gluten, because a study came out and showed it was linked to hypothyroidism. So now they're starting to do lifestyle and food guidance a little bit within the endocrinologist or specialty for hypothyroidism, but not a whole lot. And so my biggest message to you, if you've made it through my whole diagnosis story, my biggest message is, don't take a thyroid pill and think that everything's magically going to revert back to your old self, because that's not really how it works. And it didn't happen for me. I had a long struggle, a lot of tests, me going to a lot of doctors to complain, I just don't feel well, figure this out. And most of them don't want to figure it out. They really don't. And so I was doctor after doctor. And when you're not feeling well, by the way, seeing all of these doctors and asking all of these questions gets very tiring and very old very fast. But I don't want you to give up. So if you've started taking thyroid medication and you don't feel well, figure out if it's Hashimoto's or not. Get your doctor to run that test. If it is autoimmune, you're going to want to pay attention to things like leaky gut and issues that are happening in your gut that we don't even realize are happening. And if you gained weight just before your diagnosis, realize that it's going to take a lot to get the weight off. It's not that you're doing a bad job or you're not trying hard enough. It's that this is really hard work and it doesn't magically fall off. And a lot of doctors will have us believe that. They had me believing that weight would come off. It would be no issue. Your hair would grow back. But I didn't realize there's different types of thyroid medication you need to think about. If one type isn't working for you, we need to be pretty vocal about trying another type. And if the particular dosage isn't working well for you, let's say you're on a dosage, but you're falling within the limits of where your levels need to fall, but you still have all of the symptoms, there's still a conversation that you have to have with your doctor about that, because you're not doing any better. And you need to figure these things out. And they won't push you for this. They won't. As long as your levels are fine, they're like, have a nice day. See you next time. Keep your levels right there. You're great. And I was falling apart on the inside. I was exhausted. I didn't feel like I was great in life. So if you want to get better, we have to advocate for ourselves. I can't say that enough. And we have to realize and start having some of these conversations out loud. A lot of times what I went into thinking about my diagnosis, that's what a lot of people think. And we only have our doctors to ask the questions too. And so I want to open this up into stories. We learn from each other's stories. And had I known about my story a long time ago, I would have fought harder, quicker to try a different medication. I would have known that sometimes your levels could be within range, but you still feel really bad. And that's not good enough anymore. So I hope that this helped you in some way. That's basically my hypothyroidism and Hashimoto story of how I was diagnosed, what symptoms that I felt at the time, and what I wish I had known much quicker, which was Hashimoto's and that autoimmune starts in the gut. I'll see you guys in the next video.